Funding for the post-production of Lost Treasures of Christianity, the Ancient Monuments of Armenia, was made possible by Vahak and Paris Hazmig Havnanian.
Across the territory of Armenia, some of the world's most ancient churches hold clues to an age-old architectural puzzle. Did the construction techniques used in Armenia enable the construction of the great cathedrals of Europe?
The Armenians solved the problems of building in stone. Stone ceilings, stone domes, and walls, and in such a way so that the domes wouldn't come crashing down.
The existence of these ancient structures has led generations of art historians to ponder their meaning. Armenia became the first nation to adopt Christianity as its official state religion fewer than 300 years after the death of Christ. Until the Iron Curtain fell, most Western scholars had problems getting to these ancient Armenian monuments. This is the story of one scholar's crusade to keep many of Armenia's most treasured monuments from being lost, forgotten, and misunderstood.
Major funding for this program was provided by the Armenian Library and Museum of America, the Bank Boston Charitable Foundation, the Louise Manoogian Simone Foundation, and Jack Kalajian Darien. Additional funding was provided by Ralph Asmarian and the Stephen Philibosian Foundation.
And Dr. Evans for all your labor.
Since the 1970s, Tufts University art history professor Lucy DeManuelian has shared her passion for Armenian art and architecture with audiences worldwide.
4 words, simply the Armenians and Byzantium. I described the art and architecture as a kind of lost treasure, sort of lost and forgotten until relatively recently by the West. Everyone became enthralled, and I felt very happy because many of them said that, you know, the lecture has opened their eyes to a different part of the world, a part of the world they hadn't known anything about, and to different periods of history that were important for Western civilization.
At its peak, Armenia bridged continents, bounded on the west by the Mediterranean Sea and on the east by the Caspian. Invasions by Byzantines, Persians, Arabs, Seljuks, Mongols, and Ottoman Turks changed her borders considerably, leaving present-day Armenia with a small fraction of her original territory.
I got interested in medieval art and architecture of Western Europe and, you know, France and England. I was sitting in on courses at Harvard, and I kept running across these footnotes about Armenian art and architecture. And it was very surprising to me because I had never run across any mention of Armenian art and architecture in any of the textbooks on the history of art. And I began to realize that on the basis of what the footnotes said, that some more research in the field of Armenian art and architecture might answer some of the most important, unanswered, and haunting questions in the history of medieval art. For example, one question is, where did the medieval architects of Western Europe learn the building techniques that made it possible for them to build those towering Gothic cathedrals? And then some of the footnotes said that some scholars were convinced that there was a connection between Armenian architecture, which the building techniques there were developed and used centuries earlier, at least as early as the 5th century. I thought, this is amazing. I've never read about any of this in any of the art history books I had read earlier. And I thought, why not pursue this field? The specific monastery that I was studying for my dissertation was the monastery of Gerhard. And I picked it because it has some very puzzling sculpture on the outside. It's got animals, a lion and a bull fighting, and it's got peacocks in the front, and my job was trying to figure out what all this meant. It's such a fascinating monastery because tradition has it that Gregory the Illuminator, the person who brought Christianity to Armenia, founded the monastery. It's one of the most important pilgrimage centers. Gerhard means the lance, and presumably someone brought a piece of the lance which pierced the side of Christ. Was destroyed by the Arabs in the 10th century and then was liberated in the late 12th and early 13th century by the Zacharid brothers. And when they liberated the territory and saw the ruins of the monastery, they began rebuilding it. The first church was this main church, and then in the 1240s, Prince Prush bought the monastery for his family. And that's what's so interesting about these monasteries, that they belong to princely families, and they use them as their administrative center and cultural center, and there would be schools built there and also manuscripts copied there. In here, there is not only the main church standing, but when Prince Prush bought it in the 1240s, he had 4 chambers hollowed out of the cliff that look as though they were built from the ground up with all of this intricate decoration, and yet it was just carved out of the cliff. Around the surrounding cliffs, you have these rectangular slabs of stone with a large cross carved in the front of it and various ornamentation carved as a frame for it. And these were an Armenian art creation. They're not just gravestones, but they were stones that commemorated something. Maybe the finishing of the monastery, or in some cases, the end of a battle. And then along the cliffs, you find these doorways, and they were part of that early habitation of the monastery. They were monks' cells.
Part of what drew Professor de Manuelian to her expertise in Armenian art was the thought that it might answer the most important questions in medieval art. She also recalls childhood stories about Armenian history. Her godfather was also an authority on the architectural history of Armenia. Around the turn of the century, he traveled across present-day Turkey, documenting and sketching the ruins of Ani, the city that served as a capital of Armenia in the Middle Ages.
My godfather was Arshak Fetbajan, and he had been trained in Italy and practiced in St. Petersburg. He was a member of the academy. But he began going to Armenia. He participated in the excavations of the ruined capital of Armenia, the city of Ani, and spent 20 years of his life sketching the medieval Armenian churches and making thousands of details